more comfortable, that's totally fine. I will go ahead and get started. Yeah, just look it up. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Bonnie, and I'm on the events team here at Brookline Booksmith. Today, it is, of course, my pleasure to host Liz Kinchen for the release of her book, Light in Bandaged Places, in conversation with Suzanne Leonard. Thank you for being here, for supporting Liz, Suzanne, and our author event series. Before I introduce our authors, I have a few housekeeping notes. Firstly, Liz was generous enough to bring some delicious little treats and beverages over there, so folks can feel free to help themselves. There are these beautiful little cookies with the cover of the book on them, which is stunning, so definitely check those out. Also, if you'd like to buy a copy of the book or of Suzanne's book, you can do so at that back counter over there. They're both easeled up. Please keep your phones off or on silent for the duration of the reading. And finally, please know that the event is being live streamed on this iPad right here. Hello to YouTube. Our audience shouldn't be visible to live stream viewers, but if you don't want to be live on YouTube, just don't walk right in front of it. You'll probably be okay. Finally, we will have a Q&A at the end of the event, so hold your questions until the end, but definitely have them ready to go. And now for the fun part. It is my pleasure to introduce our author and tell you a bit about the book we're here to celebrate. Our conversation partner tonight is Suzanne Leonard, a professor of literature and writing, director of the graduate program in gender and cultural studies, and co-coordinator of the interdisciplinary minor in cinema and media studies at Simmons University. She's the author of Wife, Inc., The Business of Marriage in the 21st Century, and Fatal Attraction, as well as co-editor of 50 Hollywood Directors and Imagining We in the Age of I, Romance and Social Bonding in Contemporary Culture, which was the winner of the Media Communication and Cultural Studies Association's Outstanding Achievement Award for Edited Collection of the Year. You can find Suzanne's work with the Boston Globe, the New York Times, and the Guardian, to name a few, and she's been featured in media outlets such as the Los Angeles Review of Books, NPR, and many others. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Suzanne. And of course, tonight's author, Liz Kinchen, is a writer, speaker, meditation teacher, and Buddhist practitioner. She's been leading meditation groups for 45 years and has trained with leaders in the mindfulness communities such as Kristen Neff and Pema Chodron. With graduate degrees in computer science and counseling psychology, she worked in software development management for 21 years before moving into the nonprofit sector for 17 as the executive director of a small organization working with underserved children and families in Honduras. Her passions are her family, meditation, teaching mindfulness, spirituality, writing, talking with close friends, and walking in nature. She's a contributing author to the anthology Art in the Time of Unbearable Crisis, published by She Writes Press in 2022, and she lives in the greater Boston area with her husband of over 30 years. Her memoir, Light in Bandaged Places, came out last week, so congratulations, Liz. To tell you all a bit about the book we're here to celebrate, Light in Bandaged Places is a memoir that shows us the harm done when an older man in a position of power leverages that power to sexually abuse a child, cloaking his abuse in performances of love. This poignant story takes us through the long-term wounding of abuse at the hands of a teacher and the multifaceted path Liz took toward healing. As an adult, emotional closeness eluded Liz. Struggling through confusing years, she believes something is deeply wrong with her. Healing begins when an unexpected event takes her back to those formative years, and she sees for the first time what happened to her was not love, but trauma. As she begins to understand how her relationship with her former teacher destroyed her innocence and self-worth, she begins a spiritual and psychological journey that sets her free. Now, a meditation teacher and Buddhist practitioner, she offers her story in hope of helping others along their own paths of discovery and healing. I think we're in for a really enlightening and powerful night, everyone. Please welcome Liz and Suzanne. Now, before we get started with the conversation, we have a beautiful presentation that Liz has prepared for us. So I'm gonna go get that started now. Hold tight for just a minute.
really, yes.
It's really just to set some context. It's got some photos and images from past years and decades of my life with a little bit of text that sort of lightly tells the story.
Sorry for the technical difficulties here, folks. Of course, it works perfectly when we're not doing not doing the presentation. Hopefully, a little reboot will help. Not at all. I'm not sure.
It's a Windows machine.
Yeah. I have been using that. It was just odd because it detected it moments ago. Oh, now it's in the HDMI too, so let's try. There we go. Beautiful. Thank you for bearing with us, folks.
on yet? Okay, how's that? You here? So I'm going to read a fairly short excerpt from my book, and just by way of setting this up, this describes a time when I was in my 30s, and I had the opportunity to go back and meet with my teacher, who I had had this 5-year relationship with. And this is the conversation that we had at that time. My glasses. The title of this chapter is Lost Opportunity. I'm not going to read the whole chapter. During my post-divorce convalescence in the Garden apartment, I went back to Long Island to attend a family event and took that opportunity to contact Mark. I was doing some soul searching about myself and men, so I thought I might learn something from seeing him again. I had a mild curiosity to see what had become of him after his divorce from Emily. Some years before, I heard he had remarried and was still teaching. My agenda was vague. I just wanted to revisit my past and see him again. He sounded genuinely pleased to hear from me, and we agreed on a day and a time to visit. We met at the pond near the high school. As we settled onto a blanket on that summer afternoon, he said, "I'm really so happy you contacted me. I love hearing from my former students. Tell me about your life. Are you married? Kids? Are you working? What do you do?" I talked about my software job, and he said, "Oh, I am so glad to hear that. It's a great field these days. Isn't a college education great?" I described my recent master's degree in counseling psychology and my unsuccessful try at opening a private practice. "I knew you were a thoughtful one. Good for you. I know it's hard to set up your own business. Maybe you'll go back to it someday." "What about marriage? I don't see a wedding ring." "Well, I was married for a couple of years, but it didn't work out. I've been divorced now for about a year." "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I hope our relationship from back then wasn't the cause of that in any way." This oblique reference to our past caught me off guard. I replied, "Oh no, not at all. Adam just didn't really want to be married to me. It's okay, we're on friendly terms." "Well, I'm glad of that. You were always special to me. I only want what's good to come to you in life." "Thanks," was all I said in response. Why didn't I ask Mark more about this and find out what he thought about our relationship from back then? This was a question that would haunt me far into the future. Mark talked about his family, and after a while we parted ways. I spoke the truth as I understood it at the time. It was true. I didn't think anything harmful had come from our relationship. I still believed Mark loved me back then, and what we had was unique and good. I didn't learn anything about myself and men, not that day. It would be many more years before I understood just how wrong I was. When I think now of this lost opportunity to confront Mark, to tell him how damaging it was to take a young girl's trust and abuse it, I get angry. I am enraged by his audacity that day by the pond to allow me to believe I was unharmed. Clearly, he had some notion that what happened between us was wrong. He hoped it wasn't the cause of my failed marriage. By the time I understood exactly what that harm was, Mark had passed away. My rage and sadness over what he took from me and his colossal betrayal of my trust took years in my therapist's office to unearth. Before I found my way to Patricia's office, though, I had several substantial detours.
Thank you, Liz, for sharing that. It's always, I think, really interesting to hear an author read their own work, especially with something so personal as this. So thank you for sharing your voice with us. So I'd like to start by talking a little bit about the process of writing the book. We will certainly get to the content of the book shortly, but I thought that we would start just with the question, because living is one thing, writing about it is another, very different. So can you first tell me where the idea came to write about this subject?
So when I went into therapy in my 40s, finally, after a while my therapist suggested that it might be helpful for me to remember things from my past, from both my childhood and my years of relationship with my teacher, if I would write about it. And so I did that, and I found that really helpful in, uncovering some things that had been kind of murky. And I then, through the process of my therapy and my healing, I continued to write about my life, even about my more current life, and I found that I really loved writing. Just there's something about that creative process that really felt terrific to me. So back then I was just writing about my life. I had no thought about it becoming a book, not for many years. And during those years when I was writing more into my more recent decades of my life, I used to call it, I'm working on my memoir, just because I was writing about my life and I thought that's what a memoir was. But it was probably about 5 or so years ago that I thought, maybe there's something in my experience, in my story, that could be interesting to other people, and even more importantly, maybe helpful to other people, that they might resonate with some parts of my story and see that there is a way to heal from experiences like that. So that's when, about 5 years ago, I got serious about, okay, I'm going to see if I can turn this into an actual memoir. And I hired a developmental editor who took way too many words, way too many pages, and actually helped. Together we kind of worked on what is actually the narrative arc here. And she helped me decide what was not necessary, so it kind of shrunk in size, thank God. So it went through many, many more rounds of editing until I tried to find a publisher.
Thank you. That kind of anticipated another question I was going to ask, which was the book written before you tried to look for a publisher? And it sounds like it was pretty much ready to, or had been through multiple iterations.
I considered it as done as it could be, and edited as much as it could be in order for it to be okay to submit.
I had a question that I didn't put on this, but I was just wondering, to what extent do you feel that this book that we see here before us resembles or doesn't resemble what you first produced that your developmental editor helped you to hone and fine-tune?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say there's a lot in it that was there, in the beginning. It reads better now. And there were a lot of pieces that were deleted or, edited out. So I have a whole, the cutting room floor. And sometimes, it was hard to, I really want to talk about that part, but it just didn't contribute strongly enough to the overall story. So I would say it resembles it. As I said, it's shorter, but essentially a lot of it is there. Again, just better constructed.
Yeah, it sounds like the spirit is there. I know as a writer, a lot of times when I'm writing, I will have this file that says like extra, and I just keep it because I think that I'm gonna go back to that and I don't want to lose it. I never go back to it, but I feel a lot better knowing that it's there. So could you talk to me a little bit about the press? I wasn't familiar with She Writes Press, so I was curious which a hybrid publisher for women authors, which really interested me. So I was curious how you found this press, and yeah, if you could just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so, you know, there are three primary routes of publishing, right? There's the traditional publishing houses, the big five, or maybe they're four now, I don't know, New York, you know, classic publishing houses. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's self-publishing. And then in the middle, there are small presses and this newer, not new, but newer model called a hybrid press. And I knew as a first-time author, not being a celebrity, I did not have a very good chance with a traditional publishing house. So I decided right from the beginning to not do that, to not put myself through the years it might take and the millions of rejections that I would get. So I just didn't even try that. I did not want to self-publish, and so that put me in the middle. And I learned about this model of publishing that's available now called a hybrid model. And it's just a different business model, basically. You know, which way the money flows and at what point in time and what the royalty structure is just a little bit different. So I researched various different hybrid presses. I did a lot of research, you know, a lot of visiting websites and keeping spreadsheets, and I submitted to several, and I got had interviews. I got several offers, and I went with She Writes Press because I had also talked to other people who published. I did that with all of the ones actually, but especially with this one. And for the most part, people had a really good experience with them. And that has been my experience as well. In particular, what's great about She Writes is that they really foster a community of authors, right? So we have these private Facebook groups, like my cohort, everyone who published, you know, in the fall of this year, you know, and we're constantly talking to each other there, you know, we're asking questions like, who did you go to do your audiobook, and what did you think about this publicist, and things like that, and then also our celebrations. So I learned a lot, and that community saved me a lot of, I think, mistakes and ignorance, you know. It was really helpful.
Thank you, that's so interesting, especially since I think publishing and writing can often be so lonely. It's really great to hear about sort of a community of authors that support each other. That's really quite exciting. So we're going to turn now a little bit more to the content of Liz's book. So as everyone who's sitting here I think knows, this memoir is about the story of how she was groomed to have a sexual relationship with an older teacher. I also know that there are people sort of in the ether around here, so I just want people to be aware that we are going to start just talking about that topic. So if you need to remove yourself or you know, take a moment, if the conversation gets uncomfortable for anybody, please step out. I just want to really make that clear because these are quite sensitive and emotionally related topics. So with that, Liz, you write about your 5-year relationship with your teacher Mark, but at the time, as you say in the book, you didn't view it as abusive at the time. So I guess the first question is, how did that relationship happen, and what did it mean to you at the time?
So the context in which it happened is my childhood, right? So I grew up in a family, there were 5 of us siblings, and 2 parents were there, and my parents were loving, kind people. My father was a minister. However, there was a culture in our family of non-connection. We were all okay together and kind enough to each other, but we were not really in each other's lives, and nobody was really paying much attention to me. And so I felt lonely, actually, and I was also a shy kid. So when I got to middle school and 8th grade, and this English teacher, you know, paid a lot of attention to me, was interested in things like, what books am I reading, and, normal kinds of things, that someone would say to show interest. And I was a little taken aback and a little like, oh, wow, this feels kind of good to have that attention. And then as, time went by through that year and the summer after that year and into the next year, we spent more and more time together. And we would, for a bunch of those years, every day, just about every single day after school, we would meet, right? He'd pick me, I'd walk down this quiet road and then he'd come and pick me up and we'd go parking somewhere. So, and we would spend hours and hours. And that eventually turned into a sexual relationship. He said, I love you, you are really special, you are really beautiful, our love is like nothing else before, this is good. And he was married with 2 children. And so I did feel guilty about this, and I was sworn to secrecy, of course, by him, which wasn't hard for me to do, but after a while, it was just oppressive, and I knew that adultery was wrong, right? So it was this mixed thing, where on one hand, I soaked up his attention, he made me feel so important to him. And on the other hand, I had this, this conflict, and I felt guilty. So it was a mix.
Yeah, as you were talking, again, I'm sorry, I gave Liz all these questions ahead of time, and now I'm throwing curveballs that I didn't anticipate. But I feel like that's how a good conversation happens. I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more about something you write about in the book, which is your kind of compartmentalization of your life. I was really struck by that, how you, in certain ways, had different Liz's when you were with different people, or with family versus friends versus, the Philip, and then with Mark. And so I was just wondering if you could just talk about that compartmentalization a bit.
So, because I was keeping secrets, it became a way of being, where when I was with this person, this is what I was doing and this is what I was about. And there was a point in time when, simultaneous with this relationship with my teacher, I got a high school boyfriend. And it was like normal, right? Like what high school teenagers are supposed to experience together. And so I was with him. And so I learned to be, in these different kinds of relationships early on. And then later, as I went into my adult years, so what happened with Mark, the essence of what happened is that my trust was betrayed, right? I trusted him, I believed in him, he told me this was love is good, and I believed that. I was in some respects, a child. I was 14 when I met him, and our relationship started. So when there is a betrayal and abuse like that, a lot of times what we do to cope is we shut down our emotions. And when my relationship with him ended, I kind of closed the door on it, right? I said, okay, this is over. It was kind of traumatic for me to end it. And when I did, I said, okay, I'm not going to think about this again. And along with not thinking about it were a lot of feelings too that I just separated myself from. So the compartmentalization and the impact of trauma that goes into our bodies and our nervous systems, but we're not totally conscious of it, was kind of how I then proceeded to live my life.
I think that's a really good segue into the question of sort of how did you realize and even give words to the experience you had, which you now call abuse, but I think prior to a realization, you probably wouldn't have called it that. You didn't even call it that when he asked you if am I the reason for your failed marriage.
Yeah, in that part that I read, yeah, it might seem astonishing, but I didn't tell many people about that relationship. When I kind of got really serious with a relationship, I would just say, oh, that was my first, sexual experience, let's move on. So I just kind of lived in ignorance would be the word they use in Buddhism, right? Delusion, denial, until a certain event happened. And what that was is, when I was in my 40s, I had started a job that required me to take a day-long workshop in a training where we would learn how to identify different kinds of abuse if it was happening. So it included things like elder abuse, but also different forms of abuse and child abuse. So anyway, I just went because I had to go. It's part of my job. And they showed a bunch of different vignettes, a video of different vignettes of different types of abuse. And one of them was of this man who was a priest. I don't know in what kind of a church, they didn't tell us. But one day a young teenage boy came to him looking for help, and he was upset and sad because his father had recently passed away. And so he went to this priest for counseling and support. And the video showed, like, bit by bit, the priest said, oh, come back and talk to me anytime, and we can talk about anything you want, anything that's on your mind. And then, he was pouring beers for the boy, and they were sitting really close on a couch. And, it showed this progression, right? And as I was watching this, I could feel in my body something was happening, It's not my mind, but it was like I could feel like, oh my gosh, like, I think he's doing something wrong here. I think he's taking advantage of the innocence of this boy. And then, of course, it proceeded. They did have a sexual relationship, and then they showed this boy many years later as a young man, and he just said, I'm so sad. I'm so sad because I trusted and believed in him, and now I basically just feel used. And so, when he was, as this older person, talking to us, the viewer, I felt like he was talking directly to me, right? And at that point, my body was shaking. It was like, okay, I recognized what it felt like to be groomed like that, and told you were wonderful and you're loved, and so that was an event that kind of opened my eyes. And of course, they were calling that abuse, and I was like shocked. It was like, really? That's what abuse can be? So that's what really opened my eyes to it.
Yeah, when you were talking, it strikes me that it is maybe ignorance, but it's also a lack of a script, right? To knowing sort of what's happening to you, or a lack of a language, to name certain things. A lot of times, I think when we're living things, especially if it's something new and unfamiliar, we don't know the words, right? And I think, not to get on my women's studies professor soapbox, but it does strike me that we have much better language now to sort of describe things. And you were living in a time when there wasn't a lot of language, right, around particularly these issues. The way we kind of theorize consent now is very, very different, I think, than when you were growing up. So let's turn to healing. I think that this would be a good time in our conversation. So clearly this realization, putting some language to what had happened to you and recognizing it for the truth that it was, the trauma that it was. But what helped you to heal?
Well, it was a long process. So after that event with watching this video and my mind kind of being opened, like, oh, maybe I was harmed by that. And maybe that's why actually I have had so much trouble with relationships as an adult. Because what happened is, in relationships, through college, after college, even my first marriage, I appeared to people, I think, to be pretty normal, relatable, etc. But once they got into a closer relationship with me, there was a part of me, like that abused part of me was terrified, right? Terrified of trusting somebody, terrified of, I didn't know what love really meant. I didn't really know what an intimate relationship was supposed to feel like, or what you were supposed to do, or I didn't know any of it. I was really confused. And so those relationships tended to be unsatisfying for the other person, and kind of for me too. I was just sort of floating around, and not really open or honest or engaged in a lot of these relationships. So seeing that video helped kind of connect some dots. Like, oh, okay, I've got some things to look at here. Now I know kind of where to go. So I went into therapy, and that was the therapist who encouraged me to write. And I worked with her for over 10 years or so. And I learned a lot, I learned about abuse and trauma, and I learned about, how we, as a child I wasn't cared for. My emotional needs weren't really met by my family. And then I had this relationship with my teacher. So I learned a lot. I learned about, how to reparent myself, how to, really how to love and trust myself enough to begin to trust other people. And I was married to my second husband, who is sitting right there. I'm still married to him. And that's a testament to his loyalty and belief in me and in us. So I probably wouldn't be here doing this if he had not been such a steady support through my journey. So there's therapy, and there was also, I started to meditate when I was in college, and I meditated my whole life on and off, in different styles. So I had a spiritual foundation, I would say. Interestingly, I mentioned that my father was a minister, and that didn't actually go so well for me, because he was a minister in a very strict dogmatic branch of the Lutheran Church, Christian denomination, and I struggled with it a lot. How teenagers kind of ask the tough questions, like why do people go to hell? What is that about? And they just couldn't adequately answer those questions for me. In fact, they pretty much said, go home and get better faith, right? And so I said, wow, that's really disappointing. And so I pretty much turned my back on that for many, many years. But I held on to, this kind of notion that there is something larger than me, larger than us, some idea of the transcendent. And so that has stayed with me my whole life. And then when I started to study, I kind of returned in a deeper way to study Buddhism, that those teachings really spoke to me, they speak to me. And there are ways those teachings encourage us to look into what's hard, if we're feeling fear or anger or sadness, to not, turn away, but to actually, find inner resources to look at that and to hold yourself with some compassion for things that are hard. So it kind of worked well for me. It spoke to me in my process of healing.
Thank you. That was such an eloquent way of putting it. I really appreciated that. I wanted to talk a little bit about motherhood because I think it was really interesting you used the phrase you had to sort of learn how to parent yourself. And I guess I'm wondering, it seems perhaps that simultaneously you were learning how to parent yourself while you were parenting the 3 children that you share. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was feeling like some women do, or maybe men, I don't know, but I was feeling this almost physical drive to want to be a parent, to want to be a mother. I mean, it was strong. And then I have had the good fortune to be a mother. And it was another one of those most eye-opening experiences, heart-opening experiences, because, you know, when I had these children, I discovered a kind of love that I had no idea was even possible. I associated love for so many years with confusion and with withholding and things like that. And so when I became a parent, it was automatic, and I could not turn it off if I wanted to. I just love these children so much, right? And interesting, or ironically maybe, because one might think, given my own experience with being parented as a child, I would maybe continue in that same vein. But I don't think I have. I have really close, wonderful relationships. You can ask my children. But they're very close. We are very close and have been, their whole lives. Even during some of those tough years, where they're supposed to individuate and find their own way. I feel like we have retained a very strong connection. And they know I love them unconditionally. I may not like everything they do or all the choices that they may make, but it's there, and they know that.
This is when I get to tip my hand and say something a little bit personal. I have an 8 going on 9-year-old daughter, and I loved your phrase when you were talking about your daughter about sort of putting a candle in the window when she was a middle school, high schooler, so she would sort of know how to come back or where to come back. And I thought, it's funny, a lot of my friends with slightly older children have been reading all these books, and all these books are using very similar metaphors, like you need to be the wall of the pool. They're going to swim in the middle of the pool, but you'll be the wall that they'll come back to. And I thought, wow, like you were, I don't know if you read many parenting books, but it seemed like a beautiful metaphor for parenting and for being present in ways that are useful for your children, but not, overbearing. I think it is almost time to open up for questions, but I guess my final question to you would be, do you have plans to write anything else, or where, this book is literally like, the ink is drying, but just curious if you have other projects in the works.
Well, so I write a blog, and I have been doing that for a number of years now, and that right now satisfies my urge to write. I really enjoy it. My blog is really about my reflections on experiences in my own life, kind of ordinary experiences, but seeing them through the lens of Buddhist teachings and how they connect. So I enjoy doing that. I also teach mindfulness and meditation, and that is what I love to do. And I've had to cut back a little bit recently because of what the book has called for my attention. So I look forward to going back to that. I find that also a really creative, satisfying thing to do. The only reason I wanted to publish this book is, as I said, because I thought it might be helpful to other people. I mean, I'm an introvert, actually, and talking about my personal life is really not my favorite thing to do. But, you know, I just keep my mind on my intention for doing this, which is, can it help anybody? And that's also my intention for teaching, is that for me, the Buddhist teachings have been so healing and so helpful, and as they are for other people, actually. So I just feel, I don't know if compelled is the right word, but I just feel that if there's any way I can give back by doing that, then my life is okay.
Thank you for sharing your story and these intimate details. I think that's not easy to put your traumas and your joys on the page. So thank you for sharing this with us. I'm going to open this up to questions from the audience. Yes.
I was wondering whether when you started on your healing journey, if that healing process had any effects on other parts of your life. You mentioned relationship with home. Also wondering career and hobbies, if those things shifted at all, or if they were the same.
Okay, so did my healing journey impact other parts of my life, like my work and career? Okay. That's a great question. So when I finished college, it was really important to me to be able to, as a woman, financially support myself. And so that's why I studied computer science, because back then, as it is now, that was a really good career where somebody could, take care of themselves, right? So that was important to me. And so I studied that, and I got jobs in that field. For like 20 years or so, I worked in that field. But increasingly over those years, I felt like, this is not really where I'm supposed to be. Like, I didn't feel like this was speaking to my heart. And so when this opportunity to work for a nonprofit organization that was helping children, underserved children in a tough country like Honduras, it just made my heart sing to be able to do that. And I think that was actually related to my healing journey, because I hadn't really connected those dots, but somebody pointed out to me, oh, so you're helping young children who suffer heal? So, in that sense, I think, whether consciously or unconsciously, I was drawn to that kind of work. So I would say that's the main way. I would say that's impacted other parts of my life. I was really, when my kids were growing up, I was really, in a great way consumed by that whole process. I guess I will also say that some close friends of mine who have known me for a long time through that whole journey, before it started, through it and now, some of those friends had said to me in the earlier years that they found me to be kind of distant. And I'm thinking of one friend in particular, who shared that with me, and I felt a little badly at the time. This was many years ago. Anyway, that friend doesn't say that anymore, right? I mean, I'm able to really fully engage in something, even like a friendship, with another woman, like I wasn't able to before. So I think it shows up there too.
So you said writing the book was a learning experience and growing, but now that it's out there and in public and that people all know the story, how has it changed, or how have you grown now that you've shared it?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So, when I decided to try to publish it, I understood that part of that, what comes along with that, is being exposed, and there were times when that terrified me, thinking about that. Interestingly, what scared me the most, if that's the right word, I don't know, was people who know me reading this book, right? Like, I was much more comfortable with strangers, the idea that strangers would read this book. But people who have known me a long time or know me, that feels really kind of vulnerable. And so I was most worried, like, would they see me differently? Would they not want to be a friend anymore? Whatever. I just didn't know, what that would be like. I will say that, I haven't been, publicly talking about it for all that long, just really in the past, couple of weeks. I have more things ahead, but like doing this right here, right now, it's like it makes me happy. I'm not terrified. And there's so what that says to me is that there's something right about this. Like, I'm on this particular path right now, and it's the right thing for me to be doing.
That was a great answer. Other questions?
Well, this is just a minor one. Was your father a minister in the Missouri Synod section or sect of the Lutheran Church? Was it?
Yes.
I had a similar experience. My father was a minister, but my first husband was Missouri. Brought up in that sect, and I experienced the same feelings.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question about it?
Sure.
So in my experience with it, I felt like this is not a tradition that I can call home for me, and I'm just curious whether that was the case for you.
Absolutely. So I was brought up in a very warm, wonderful Greek Orthodox Christian faith where there's a lot of flexibility. And he was always telling me, no, you're either elect or damned. And, this is very serious. I've been laughing about it now because it seems so over the top, but it was either you were elect or damned. I said, well, what about good works and this and that? This is the way, total culture clash. Yeah, I really was a problem, and I had no idea that it was Missouri Synod, that whole way of thinking, until probably after we got married, because it didn't come together. So it was very interesting, and that it didn't last. Yeah, with that kind of attitude, right? You're elect or damned. Yeah. I mean, I thought that Puritans, I just, it's difficult.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. Not that I want to talk about religion, but I think it's unfortunate because experiences like that, or traditions like that, give Christianity a bad name, and it had that bad name for me for a long, long time in my life. And my husband would say to me, not all Christianity is like your father's church. And I was like, you know nothing. I know. It's all the same, right? Because I had just, I don't want to even think about it. It was like, it had hurt me, And now, of course, I have come to realize it is not all like that. And that even, in fact, there are a lot of the teachings and principles of Buddhism that are very similar and compatible to those of Christianity if you just dive down deeply enough.
I think we have time for one more question if there is. Yes.
I just want to kind of recognize something you said about the isolation you felt, and I think that's so common with people who are exposed to trauma and go through trauma. It's so, because of the secrecy that you mentioned too, it's so lonely and isolating. And I know you, and I agree that you're an introvert, and yet everything you're doing now, and when you're teaching mindfulness and these book tours, is the opposite of that. Like, you're really connecting and reaching out, and do you consider that kind of another healing path? Like you had 10 years of therapy and relationships that were healing, but is the reaching out and social connection and service part of your healing as well?
Yeah, thank you, Rose. Yeah. Rose has known me for many, many years, since college. Yeah, it's, connecting with people, talking with people, just fills my heart with joy. And it was not always like that. I was scared of people. I used to be one of those people who would go into Starbucks, back in the day, and I would avert my eyes and look down because I don't want to make any eye contact with anybody. I don't want anybody to relate to me at all. I just wanted to stay in my cone of isolation because that was familiar and comfortable to me. But that was a while ago. But anyway, I say that because even for me now, I'm really different when I go into Starbucks. I'm not afraid, and it is actually in the connection that I find joy, and teaching is like that. Teaching is a way of kind of deeply connecting with people.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say thank you so much to Brookline Booksmith for creating this space of community. To our wonderful engaged audience for your excellent questions. And finally to Liz, thank you so much for sharing this with us. It's really a gift.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being in conversation.
And thank you, Suzanne, for being here.
If folks are interested, you can pick up a book at that back counter over there. Just to echo Suzanne's thoughts, thank you for being here. Thank you for your time, your attention, your wonderful questions, and thank you again to Liz and Suzanne. It was really wonderful to have you. Oh, yes, and Liz will be at this table to sign copies of the book. So feel free to come pick one up, and thanks again for being here.